There's this Chinese saying, 失败是成功之母, which can be translated to failure is the mother of success. There are hundreds and thousands of quotes and speeches online speaking about this topic, yet whenever one is faced with failure, our first instinct is to hide. Hide it from the world, hide it from everyone around us. Why? Because the thought of failure to most is absolutely terrifying. We fear being vulnerable, we fear becoming out of the norm. And this fear all stems from the walls of stigma society builds around failure. Living in a society where success is highly lauded, failure is seen as something out of the ordinary and hence becoming something that we are embarrassed about. Unlike success, no one dares to boast about their failure because that means that we are putting ourselves out in the world at our lowest and in our most vulnerable state. As a child, I had little exposure to the concept of failure, and that led me to perceive failure as something very foreign and negative. As a result, I started to believe that failure was the end of the world. The fear of being stigmatized and outcasted led me to go into great lengths to avoid it. However, despite all the caution I took, it backfired, and I went into a downward spiral, dwelling in the abyss of self-pity and self-destruction. In my eyes, school has always been like a race, a marathon. We are always competing against each other, pitting ourselves against others. With every year completed, it seemed like a step closer to the finishing line, which was graduation. At the age of 16, we would head on to secondary 4 in preparation for college. In that race, everyone is always trying to keep up with someone else, some even trying to exceed others. However, unlike my peers, the 16-year-old me fell, and I ended up lagging severely behind others. The 16-year-old me remained in secondary 3, learning the same syllabus for the second time in the past 2 years. Why? Because I failed my year. I retained. In my social circle, the word retention is heard pretty frequently, in which majority of the time it encapsulates joking connotations. Things like, I'm gonna fail my exams, I'm gonna retain, or, oh, we are failing, let's retain together. Sometimes even used as parents as a light-hearted threat, which goes like, if you don't study hard enough, you're gonna retain. I find that's often joking about failure. Yet whenever one is faced with failure, our reaction completely differs from the light-hearted tone used when joking about it. We fail to realize how dire the consequences are when failure is dawned upon oneself, and the weight of stigma it carries along with it. Hearing that I failed my year led me into absolute despair. I broke down. I felt betrayed. I felt hopeless. It was as if all my hard work had gone down the drain. All the quotes like, hard work never lies, hard work always pays off, just turned into complete mockery. I started to believe that I wasn't smart enough, that I was a disappointment, and that my life and my future had just ended right then. Life, as I've always known it, there is always a time and a place for everything. At 12, you move forward to secondary school. At 16, you prepare to go to college, and at 18, you prepare to go to university. Retention had so much more meaning than just relearning this year. It meant that I was behind time, that I was lagging behind others, and that I was not going to be doing what was expected of a normal 16-year-old teenager. Not in the same class as the rest, not studying the same syllabus as the rest, and no longer having the same peers of the same age. The fact that no matter what I did, I would never be able to catch up with them haunts me. I remember the first few weeks after getting the news, I never dared to look into the eyes of others. As strangers walked past me, it felt like everyone knew my secret and they were all looking down on me. I felt absolutely vulnerable and exposed. Retention, something that was seen as a failure in society, something that is deemed a disgrace in the eyes of everyone, destroyed my self-esteem, ruined my perception of examinations, schools, and studies. In the eyes of a 16-year-old, retention had meant the absolute end of the world. However, even with all of this, moving forward is inevitable, because time stops for nobody. The new school year had soon begun, and I remember the anxiety I felt the day before. As I was going to bed, my mom sat me down, she looked me right in the eye, and she asked, "Jiaqian, do you know why our eyes are at the front of our heads and not at the back?" I took a moment to process what she just said, as she continued. "It's because we are to look forward and not look behind." That sentence kept me up that night. It dawned upon me that I was too hung up on the past, something that I could never change, to see that I had a life to live and a future that was ahead of me. All my life, people often put a full stop behind failure, and that just means the end. If we could just click the backspace button on the keyboard to replace the full stop with a comma, to challenge the idea of failure, that comma would open the door to many more possibilities. Being able to turn my failure into my driving force and understanding that failure is not the end of the world is certainly one of the main takeaways I had from this year. To take away the full stop that society placed behind my failure and continue the sentence with my own narrative took quite some time and an immensely strong support system. Thanks to that, I was able to slowly but steadily walk out of the hole of failure, as I began to realize that things were not as bad as my mind made it out to be. I was afraid of getting bullied, ostracized because of my retention. I was afraid that even people around me would leave me because of this failure. And I thought that my year would be extremely painful to go through. Yet, I was proved wrong again and again. My new classmates reached out to me open-mindedly, accepting me from whatever background I came from. From the comfort and trust my parents gave me to the warm smiles and supports of my friends, people I thought would leave me stayed by me despite everything. And I became so much closer to my family and friends as they walked through the journey with me. As I began to go through the syllabus again, I realized how much I didn't know. Despite having already learned the content once, I was still able to learn something new every lesson. I learned how to better manage my time, better toggle around with study and leisure. With better time management and better studying habits, my results were steadily improving, and I was given much more opportunities to venture out on things that I could not possibly afford previously due to my poor results. Failure is a huge part of our lives, and it is what shapes us into the people that we are today. A year ago, if someone spoke to me about failure, I would dismiss it and probably joke about it. However, now, after going through what my 16-year-old self thought was the end of the world, failing and picking myself up again, I've come to realize that failure isn't as bad as it seems. Yes, I am still learning. Yes, I still feel anxious before exams. And yes, I still stumble on a few of my subjects. But what's important is that a year ago, when I faced my failures, I did not allow myself to give up and believe in what society defined failure as. This was progress. This is growth. And nobody or no failure could hold me or should hold any one of us back from developing our full potential. If we could all start placing a comma instead of a full stop behind failure, we would create a less punishing and a more nurturing environment for learning and growth to happen.